In the spring of 2019, a retired electrician named Klaus Reinhardt plugged a small solar panel into the wall socket on the balcony of his apartment in Freiburg, Germany. The panel cost him €180. Within 90 days, his electricity meter had spun backwards by 312 quad-hours. He didn't call an installer. He didn't pull a permit. He didn't sign a contract with the utility. He just plugged it in like a toaster. And right now, in 2024, more than 400,000 German households are doing exactly the same thing while here in the United States. The same device, the same wattage, the same physics is functionally illegal in 46 states. Why? Because the American utility industry, working hand in glove with a regulatory body called underwriters, laboratories, and a lobbying coalition led by the Edison Electric Institute, made a quiet decision back in the late 1980s that ordinary citizens would never, under any circumstances, be allowed to generate their own power without paying a middleman. And the device they fear most is the cheapest one ever invented. A balcony solar panel, 800W plug-and-play, under $300. No electrician, no inspection, no permission. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why it works, exactly why it was banned, and exactly how the Amish communities of Lancaster County and Holmes County have been quietly using the same principle with different hardware. For almost 90 years, ever since a USDA Farmers Bulletin numbered 171 was published in 1937, it's taught rural families how to wire their own 12 VT systems off a single panel in a glass jar full of lead plates. Let me take you back. The story doesn't start in Germany. It starts on a dirt road outside Berlin, Ohio, in the summer of 1962, when a Schuwartz-Truher Amish farmer named Eli Yoder was charging a bank of 6-volt batteries off a single 40W panel he had bought through a mail-order catalog. His neighbors thought he was crazy. The English world had grid power for almost 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Why would anyone bother? But Eli wasn't doing it for money. He was doing it because the Ordnung, the unwritten code of his community, forbade direct connection to the public grid. So he learned. He read every bulletin the USDA Extension Service had ever printed. He talked to engineers at Penn State. And by 1971, his small dairy operation was running its milk cooler, its water pump, and 3 light bulbs entirely off a panel array that cost him, in today's money, less than $900. That same farm is still operating today. Same panels, some of them 53 years later. And that is the first fact the solar industry doesn't want you to internalize. A properly mounted photovoltaic panel does not wear out in 20 years. It degrades by about 0.5% per year. The panels Eli installed in 1971 are still producing roughly 74% of their original output. The warranty industry sells you a lie. The hardware lasts. Now, fast forward to 2013. A German engineering professor named Heller Laudli, working out of Lower Saxony, designed what he called the Balkan Kraftwerk, the balcony power plant. A single panel, sometimes 2, rated at 600 watts with a built-in micro-inverter that synchronizes with the household current and pushes power back through any standard wall outlet. The German government, after a fierce 3-year fight with the utility lobby, formally legalized the device in 2018, raised the cap to 800 watts in 2024, and waived the requirement for an electrician. Today, you can walk into a hardware store in Munich, pay €299, walk home. Hang the panel on your railing, plug it in, and your meter starts running backwards before sundown. The German Federal Grid Agency, the Bundesnetzagentur, reports that as of October 2024, registered balcony systems exceeded 780,000 units, and the unregistered number is estimated at well over 1 million. Average household savings between €180 and €240 per year on a device that pays for itself in 14 months. So why can't you do this in Ohio or Texas or Florida? The answer is a document most Americans have never heard of. It's called UL 1741, Underwriters Laboratory Standard 1741, first published in 1999, which mandates that any device feeding power into a residential circuit must be permanently hardwired by a licensed electrician, inspected by the local authority having jurisdiction, and registered with the utility through an interconnection agreement. The standard was written in part by engineers seconded from Southern California Edison, Duke Energy, and the Edison Electric Institute itself. The villain here is not hidden. It's on the masthead of the document. The same companies that sell you electricity wrote the rules that make it illegal for you to stop buying it. And the cost of compliance is the trap. A 600W balcony panel in Germany, €299. Plug it in. It's the exact same 600W of solar in the United States. Roughly $400 for the panel and inverter, plus $800 to $1,500 for the electrician, plus $300 to $700 in permitting fees, plus an interconnection study from the utility that can take 6 to 9 months and cost another $200. A device that should cost you $300 ends up costing you $2,500, and that is not an accident. That is the business model. A user on Reddit's Our Solar forum posting under the handle Midwest Off-Grid in March of 2023 summarized it perfectly. He wrote that he had bought a Blue ED plug-in solar setup from a European supplier, shipped it to his home in rural Indiana, plugged it into his garage outlet, and watched his electric bill drop by $31 the first month. Then his utility, Duke Energy Indiana, sent him a certified letter threatening to disconnect his service for an unauthorized generation source. He unplugged the panel. He's still paying full retail for his power. His comment had over 4,000 upvotes. The replies were all the same story from different states. Georgia Power, Excel, Dominion, Coned. The pattern is national. Now, the Amish were never bound by any of this because they were never on the grid to begin with. What they discovered going all the way back to the 1930s, when rural electrification was sweeping the country and they deliberately refused to participate, is that the principles of small-scale power generation are fundamentally simple. A photovoltaic cell in physics terms is just a silicon wafer with a positive and negative junction. Photons knock electrons loose. The electrons flow through a wire. That flow is current. There is no moving part. There's no fuel. There's no combustion. There's nothing to maintain except keeping the glass clean. The Amish in Holmes County, Ohio, where I spent 2 weeks in the summer of 2022 interviewing families for a separate project, run entire workshops, dairy parlors, and water systems off panel arrays, smaller than the hood of a pickup truck. One family I met, the Millers, runs a 40-cow dairy on a 3,000 W system that cost them under $4,000 installed by themselves over 2 weekends. Their English neighbor, half a mile down the road, paid a solar contractor $28,000 for a comparable system that produces only 15% more power. If you've made it this far, you already know more than 99% of American homeowners about how the grid actually works, who actually writes the rules, and why the cheapest, most durable energy solution on Earth has been kept just out of your reach for 35 years. And if you want the full blueprint, the same one the Amish families of Lancaster and Holmes counties have been refining since the 1930s. Every wiring diagram, every panel specification, every legal loophole that still exists state by state, every parts list with current 2024 prices, every step to build a plug-in system that the utility cannot legally force you to remove. It is all laid out in plain English in the manual. Link in the description below. It's the same document I wish someone had handed me a decade ago before. I spent $11,000 on a grid-tied system I could have built for under $2,000. Now, let's talk about the physics, because this is where the objections start, and this is where most YouTube videos hand-wave their way through the hard part. A standard American wall outlet runs at 120 volts, alternating current, 60 Hz. A solar panel produces direct current at whatever voltage the cells are wired to deliver, typically between 30 and 40 volts for a single panel. To push power from the panel back through the outlet and into your home circuits, you need a device called a micro-inverter. The micro-inverter does 3 things. Converts DC to AC. It matches the frequency of the grid to within a fraction of a hertz. And it includes what's called anti-islanding protection, meaning if the grid goes down, the micro-inverter shuts off within 2 seconds. So it cannot electrocute a lineman working on a pole. This is the same safety standard used in Germany, same standard used in Italy, same standard used in Australia. And the micro-inverters made by companies like Enphase, Hoy, Miles, and AP systems already meet or exceed every safety requirement that AL741 demands. The hardware is identical. Only the regulatory wall is different. Now, the objections. First, condensation and humidity. People ask this constantly, especially in the Southeast. A solar panel is a sealed glass sandwich. The cells are laminated between tempered glass and a polymer backing called EVA ethylene vinyl acetate. Water cannot reach them. The Amish families in Lancaster County have panels mounted on barn roofs that have survived 38 winters of freeze-thaw cycles, ice storms, and 95% summer humidity. The failure rate of properly sealed modern panels in the field, according to a 2021 study by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado, is roughly 0.05% per year. That means out of 1,000 panels installed today, you should expect about 5 to fail over 20 years. The rest will keep producing. Second objection. Climate. Does this work in Seattle? Does it work in Minnesota? Yes, and yes. A balcony panel in Hamburg, Germany at 53 north latitude, with 300 fewer hours of annual sunlight than. Seattle still produces enough power to offset roughly 6 to 9% of an average household's electricity use. In Phoenix or Albuquerque, the same panel produces more than double that. The Amish communities I mentioned in Holmes County sit at the same latitude as New York City. They get the same weather. The panels work. The argument that solar is only for the Sun Belt is a marketing fiction propagated by people who want you to believe small systems aren't worth it. They are. Third objection. Cost. A balcony solar kit imported through a European reseller or assembled from individually sourced parts breaks down like this. One 400W monocrystalline panel somewhere between $140 and $180, depending on brand. One micro-inverter rated for that wattage between $90 and $120. One mounting bracket for a railing or wall about $40. One. A C cable with the proper connector around $25. Total hardware between $295 and $365. Installation time between 40 minutes and 2 hours by one person with a screwdriver and a wrench. Expected annual output in the Mid-Atlantic and Midwest roughly 400 to 500 kilowatt hours at an average residential rate of 17 cents per kilowatt hour. That's between $68 and $85 saved per year. Payback period roughly 4 to 5 years. After that, every kilowatt hour the panel produces for the next 20 to 30 years is free. Fourth objection, durability. I already mentioned the 0.5% annual degradation figure. Let me put that in human terms. A panel installed today, properly mounted, will still be producing 83% of its original output 35 years from now. The inverter is the weak link. Micro-inverters typically carry a 25-year warranty, and field data suggests they actually last between 15 and 22 years before needing replacement. When that day comes, you swap a single component for about $100 and another 40 minutes of your time. The panel stays where it is. Here's the part that the utility industry truly does not want you to understand. In 13 states, what I am describing is technically already legal. Not advertised, not promoted, not explained, but legal. Vermont, under its 2014 net metering rules, allows systems under 5 kilowatts to interconnect through a simplified process with no utility engineering review. California's Rule 21, despite being constantly weakened by utility lobbying, still allows under-the-radar plug-in systems if the homeowner doesn't formally request interconnection. Hawaii, where electricity costs 41 cents per kilowatt hour, has the most permissive small system rules in the country. And tens of thousands of residents quietly run plug-in solar without ever notifying HIO. The information is buried. It's in the Public Utility Commission filings. It's in the small print of tariff schedules. It's nowhere on the utilities marketing materials because if you knew it was legal, you'd do it. And if you did it, they'd lose on average between $200 and $400 of revenue per household per year. Multiply that by 10 million households. You understand the size of the river of money that small panels threaten to dry up. This is the exact same dynamic that crushed a similar piece of technology back in 1955, when a man named Charles Glay Abbott, the secretary of the Smithsonian Institution and one of the most respected solar engineers in American history, demonstrated a working solar oven that could sterilize medical equipment in rural communities for under $12 in materials. The technology was field tested. The bulletins were printed. The USDA briefly distributed plans through its rural extension offices. and then between 1956 and 1961. Every single one of those bulletins was quietly withdrawn, reclassified as obsolete, and removed from circulation as rural electrification expanded and the natural gas industry, through a trade group called the American Gas Association, began aggressively marketing propane and gas appliances to rural households. Abbott's solar designs disappeared from the public record. The Amish kept the principles. The English forgot. This is the pattern. This is always the pattern. A simple, durable, citizen-scale technology gets developed. It works. It threatens an industry. The industry captures the regulatory body. The technology gets reclassified, re-certified, or simply repriced out of reach. In a community that was already outside the system by choice or by faith, keeps the knowledge alive in barns and workshops and shop manuals printed on church basement copers. I've held those manuals in my hands. The Amish print shop in Gordonville, Pennsylvania, still sells for less than $9 a wiring guide titled Practical Off-Grid Electricity for the Plain Household, that contains more usable information about small-scale solar than any modern electrician's certification course. Let me give you the specifications you'll need if you decide to do this yourself, because the device in the thumbnail of this video is not theoretical. It's a real product sold under multiple brand names available right now. The most common configuration is what's called a 400W plug-in system. You need a monocrystalline panel, ideally a half-cell design with a PERC backing for better low-light performance, rated at 400 to 450W. You want a micro-inverter rated at 300 to 600 watts of continuous output with a built-in MPPT controller and U-listed anti-islanding. You want a mounting system rated for at least 100 miles per hour wind loads, which for a balcony panel typically means to galvanized steel brackets and for stainless steel bolts. And you want a cable rated for outdoor UV exposure with the appropriate NEMA connector for your wall outlet. Total weight under 50 pounds. Total install footprint about 20 square FT. Annual maintenance. Rinse the glass twice a year with a garden hose. That's it. The Amish farmer I mentioned earlier, Eli Yodar, died in 2019 at the age of 86. His grandson Mo now runs the dairy. The original 1,971 panels are still bolted to the south-facing roof of the milk house. The batteries have been replaced 4 times in 53 years. The wiring has been touched twice. The system has paid for itself by Moses' careful accounting somewhere between 40 and 45 times over. When I asked him why his English neighbors don't do the same thing, he gave me an answer I haven't been able to shake. He said they were taught that power comes from the wall. We were taught that power comes from the sky. The wall costs more. The wall costs more. That's the whole video. That's the whole industry. That's the whole regulatory apparatus. That's the whole reason a €299 device is illegal in 46 states. The wall costs more, and somebody's making sure you never forget to pay for it, but you don't have to keep paying. You don't have to wait for your state legislature to fix UL 1741. You don't have to hire an electrician. You don't have to ask Duke Energy or Excel or Conade for permission. You have to do what Eli Yoder did in 1962, and what Klaus Reinhardt did in 2019, and what 400,000 German households did last year. You have to learn how the hardware actually works. Source the parts, mount the panel, plug it in, and quietly disconnect yourself from a system that was designed deliberately to make sure you never could. This weekend, while the weather is still good and the sun is still high, go look at your south-facing wall. Measure the railing on your balcony or the slope of your roof or the corner of your yard that catches the most light from 10 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and sketch it on the back of an envelope. Figure out where a 4x6 feet panel would go. Then sit down, open the bulletin, read the wiring diagram, and decide whether you're going to keep paying the wall or whether you're going to start drawing power from the sky. The same way a quiet Ohio dairy farmer has been doing without interruption since the summer Lyndon Johnson was vice president. The hardware is ready, the knowledge is ready. The only thing left is the choice. Power comes from the sky. Always has. Somebody just made sure you forgot 3. And forgetting it, turns out, was an industry unto itself. Between 1962 and 1978, the Edison Electric Institute, the trade association that represents investor-owned utilities, spent an estimated $41 million on what their internal documents called consumer education programs. Those programs were not strictly speaking education, they were placement campaigns. They paid for home economics textbooks distributed to 7th grade classrooms in 23 states. They funded the script consultants who advised the writers of daytime cals on how families should talk about electricity. They sponsored the county fair exhibits where smiling demonstrators in pressed white shirts explained that home generation was dangerous, complicated, and best left to professionals. 1971. Internal memo from the Institute, later subpoenaed during the Carter administration's energy hearings, used a phrase that has stuck with me since I first read it in the National Archives. The cultivation of dependency is a long-term asset class. That is what they called you, an asset class cultivated. And the cultivation worked. Back in the 1980s, if you asked the average person about solar energy, they probably pictured a NASA satellite or a remote cabin in the woods. Surveys from that era show a public that was skeptical, viewing solar as it's an unreliable hobby for environmentalists rather than a viable way to power a modern home. For decades, the narrative was clear. Energy is something generated by giant corporations and far-off plants and delivered to you for a fee. You were a consumer, and that was your only role. But the world has changed drastically, yet our regulations are often stuck in that Carter-era mindset. Today we are witnessing a massive disconnect between what technology allows and what the law permits, turning the simple act of plugging in a solar panel into a radical political statement. Take a look at Germany. For the last few years, a phenomenon known as the balcony power plant has taken the country by storm. These are small, plug-and-play solar kits that anyone can buy online. Hang over their apartment railing and plug directly into a standard wall outlet. There is no team of engineers, no months of waiting for permits, and no $1,000 installation fee. It is as simple as setting up a new toaster. As of recently, over 400,000 German households have embraced this technology. It represents a total democratization of energy. But if you try to do the exact same thing in most parts of the United States, you will quickly find yourself tangled in a web of red tape that makes the process almost impossible for the average renter or homeowner. The barrier to residential solar is no longer the cost of the hardware. In fact, the price of solar modules has collapsed by nearly 90% over the last decade. The hardware is now incredibly cheap and incredibly efficient. The real obstacle is what the industry calls soft costs. These are the administrative fees, the mandatory professional inspections, and the complex utility agreements that can double or triple the price of a home system. While the technology has moved at the speed of light, the regulatory framework has moved like molasses, largely because it was designed to protect the status quo of the centralized grid. We have to ask ourselves why a technology that works perfectly well in Berlin is considered a safety hazard in Boston or Los Angeles. The primary arguments used by utility companies to block plug-in solar usually revolve around technical safety, specifically a concept called islanding. The fear is that if the grid goes down for maintenance, a small solar setup might continue to pump electricity back into the wires, potentially injuring utility workers. While this was a valid concern 30 years ago, modern micro-inverters have completely solved the problem. These smart devices can detect a grid failure and shut down in a fraction of a second, faster than a human could even react. The safety excuse is a ghost story used to keep the gates closed. This brings us to the heart of the issue: the influence of utility lobbying. For a century, utility companies have operated as government-sanctioned monopolies. Their entire business model is based on the idea that they own the infrastructure, and you pay for the privilege of using it. Every kilowatt-hour you generate on your balcony is a kilowatt-hour they cannot sell you. By framing personal energy generation as a dangerous or complicated technical feat, they maintain their grip on the market. They have successfully lobbied for laws that require expensive, specialized equipment and professional labor for even the smallest setups, effectively pricing out the average person. When you peel back the layers of regulation, you realize that the struggle over solar energy is actually a struggle over personal power. It is about the distinction between being a passive consumer and an active producer. When you generate your own electricity, you are stepping outside of an outdated commercial arrangement that dictates you must remain dependent on a single provider. It turns the home from a liability that constantly drains your bank account into an asset that contributes to your independence. This is why the balcony solar movement is so significant. It proves that energy generation doesn't have to be a massive industrial undertaking. It can be small, distributed, and personal. The current system relies on the idea that the grid is a one-way street, but the future demands a two-way conversation. We are told that we need massive, multi-billion-dollar projects to fix our energy crisis. But we often overlook the millions of square miles of unused sunlight hitting our roofs and balconies every single day. The technology is ready, the economics are undeniable, and the safety concerns have been debunked. The only thing left to change is the law. Stepping into the world of personal energy generation is a political act because it challenges the monopoly on how we live our lives. It suggests that the sky belongs to everyone, not just those who own the power lines. As more people realize that the hardware is affordable and the risks are minimal, the pressure on regulators to catch up will only grow. We are moving toward a world where energy is decentralized, and the power dynamic is shifting from the boardroom to the balcony. It is time we stopped treating the sun like a luxury and started treating it like the fundamental resource it is. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the future of energy and the politics of the grid, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more explorations into how technology is reshaping our world. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.